In France, there is no word like winemaker. There's only vignerons. And a vigneron is maybe somebody who plant the vines, care for them, harvest them, ferment them, and pray. Wine is a mirror of the environment first and foremost. I mean, man can only care for it. It can never make the wine. Vriesenhof is a place. They made wine here until 1947. In Simon van der Stel's time, this was the Adam Tasse's grazing land. So the vegetation plus the location are actually the main thing for having select Vriesenhof. Yeah, I think Vriesenhof is a unique site because the lie of the land is on a foothill of the Stellenbosch mountain facing from north to south. We've got this mountain, big mountains as a backdrop to False Bay and Table Bay, which help air circulation during the growing season. Because when the valley has heated up enough, the air starts rising over the mountains, and that causes a huge amount of air circulation, which obviously, to a certain extent, they control the temperature again. It's also, the lower areas are decomposed granite, and the higher areas is shale, which is two completely different kettle of fish. So the soil and the grape variety, or the plants, are giving me the history of place, because without place there's no history. So from a place point of view, it's a very special area. I grew up on a farm close to Lammert's Bay. I grew up in an environment where there were always vines. I mean, the oldest Grenache vineyards are still on my nephew's farm. And during the holidays, I worked for my granddad and later for my uncle. Maybe I wasn't clever enough, and my dad said, "Why don't you go and study agriculture at Stellenbosch?" But I didn't know where Stellenbosch were, because I only went from Lammert's Bay to Malmesbury during the high school time. Because we were 8 nephews and 1 daughter. And not everybody could study, so the 3 brothers decided that I'll be the next guy. And I was lucky to be dropped here exactly 60 years ago on the 4th of February. I tasted the 61 Canon Pinotage, which was a champion wine in 1961, and the 59 Belleville, which was also a Pinotage at the Young Wines Show of 1959. So those two wines actually brought the stimulants to the party. I realized that wine is actually something that emphasized the uniqueness. The combination of soil, plant and peoples were actually the thing that stimulated everything. When we had 73, I realized that that's the route we should go, because that wine, from the day I harvested it until we bottled it, it was just something special. One of the neighbors popped up one day and he said, "But who planted that vineyard? It looks as if you planted in the moonshine," because the rows wasn't too straight. It was quite difficult, so you had to organize your time really properly. I had to do a job because we got free rent a weekend. When we were national players, we got a writing pad to tell your parents where you are. So normally I slept in the cellar during the harvest, so that I didn't waste time between the house and the cellar. And then we had to practice in between later on. In the beginning we only practiced on a Thursday, but as the game developed and the spectators grew, we also, in the end, we were maybe 3 or 4 days a week driving to Newlands and back. Now luckily, I could, let's say, farm until 3 o'clock. Then I picked up some of the guys, which were students in those days, without cars. Even Olivier, for instance, and Robbie Blair. So we drove to Newlands and then drive back after the practice. You end up back at home at 9 o'clock in the evening. Then work in the cellar and try to sleep a little for the next day. I remember all the detail. First of all, the French are very lazy. So I had to carry 300 tons of grape into the cellar and carry the skins out of the cellar. Because they only arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then they open a bottle of wine, some baguette which they bought on their way to the work, and some pâté, and that's the start of the day. I could never imagine that these guys spend 6 hours a day eating. And Muzzini will stop here, or Caire will stop here, and Pullini will start here, just 800 millimeters further. And the same with the Pinot, if you look at Boland, and then just down the hill is another vineyard, and it's completely different. A man by the name of Connie O wrote the following about Chardonnay. He's said to say Chardonnay is a great grape variety. It's a little like saying Michelangelo was a great artist. True indeed, but also a great injustice. Because if you think of all the great champagnes, if you think of all the great white wines of the world, whether it's France or Australia or California, it's Chardonnay. And because of Willie's influence and the quality of Chardonnay, which was becoming more popular because of the Californians also. So we decided to go to Europe, because you know, our industry was very much influenced by some German winemakers. And a guy like Danie, for instance, studied in Vriesenhof. So because of the language, it was easy to go to Germany, but for the rest of the world, I think I was the first guy who actually went to France. The main reason was we couldn't bring in plants, and eventually when we brought in some plants, it was either burnt or confiscated. I decided, but if we can't import the stuff, then we must go and fetch it. Yeah, I went from Boland to London, where Danie was the ambassador in those days. I couldn't get the flight back home. It was most probably the best place where I could sort of make sure that they stay alive. And I buried it in the garden in my son's nappies, and then when I came back, I just went to fetch it. And actually, I thought it must be worthwhile to take a chance, even if you have to go to jail. So, no, I think Chardonnay, we eventually brought it in, and then we realized that you can't make Chardonnay from wood. You must make it from the from the grapes. And that was the exciting part of it, especially if you've tasted. I mean, Drouin had a big vineyard in Chablis, but the rest of the vineyards was in the Côte de Beaune. So I could already see the difference in terms of the taste of the fruit by just tasting the grapes, and then eventually the wine. So it was sort of worthwhile taking the chance to bring it here. Well, I think Stellenbosch is unique in the sense that if you look at it from a topographical angle, then obviously it's this huge valley with the mountains as the backdrop. But these mountains are standing on foothills, which is pushing right into the valley. Actually, in some cases, almost close to the beach. If you look at Constantia or even the Helleberg area, the southern side of the Helleberg, the hills are going down actually right on the sea or right on the beach. And the orientation is also from north to south mainly. I mean, that's not by accident that the Helleberg area facing almost 100% north, because we're in the southern hemisphere where the sun is going through the north to the west. So it's completely different than where we're sitting today. I mean, because of the pine plant growing from, let's say, mid-September to end January, it's also the time when the winters are turning around from southeast to northwest to southeast, which in fact is the coolest wind we get, or the coolest air circulation we get, are playing a major role in this. And then obviously the relationship of man and your place. Because nowadays with technology and fertilizers and what have you, from kelp to nitrogen, you can do anything. And I mean, you can't take the passion from most of the wine guys away. Stellenbosch Cabernet belongs to Stellenbosch. So I think if you farm in Stellenbosch and you haven't got Cabernet, then you must go to the kop doctor. You must marry the oak tree in the forest with a vineyard in South Africa. That means that the tree must be in the right place in France before it's chopped for drying the wood to make a barrel. And also the vineyard in South Africa to have the right style to suit the barrel. So the barrel is as important as all the other things. What makes a wine good? Only a good vineyard to start off with. So good fruit and good caring. Because a winemaker is only a humble servant of that what nature's provide. There's no great wine, there's only great bottles. The greatest wine I think I had was a 1784 Lafitte from the cellar of Thomas Jefferson. Vriesenhof Cabernet is coming from Vriesenhof. And it's the only wine that if you make wine from those grapes, it must tell the story of the place. And in future, telling the history of the place. So again, we're back in the vineyard. And we're talking about clonal selection and other rootstock selections that fit the place. Because the place you can't transfer. I mean, you can replant the vineyard, but there's no ways you can do it the other way around. Talk about vintage, we talk about time. And a good vintage can only exist when the environmental factors are all in place. But not only in place, but in the right place. And then, of course, when it comes to the cellar, it's the caring of the man in charge. Because I don't think you can do much without caring. The fascination of wine for me is from a, let's say, natural point of view. Because it's just incredible how these elements of nature can influence the crop. And obviously for the better or for the worse. I think today winemakers need to expose them to wines of the world, because it's only in the differences that you will learn more. And fascinating, I mean, we recently tasted some 42 Cabernets from Stellenbosch, and including some Bordeaux. And I was amazed how close the wines has become over the last 20 years, because we use the same technology, the same crushers, the same presses, the same barrels now, from the same coopers. So we need to be very careful not to lose the environment in our new approach. I would like to be remembered as a man who cared for the wine and the environment.